Kia ora, everyone.
Kia ora. Hey, Sally. How you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. Righty-ho. Well, maybe we just start going in terms of things that have happened since last time. So things that have happened since last time, as it turns out, ministers like the thought of a domestic vaccine certificate. So the ministers like the thought of a vaccine certificate. So in a domestic context, so we're starting some work on that. So my background's changed for the day because I'm working down at the Spark building where the ministry's got some space for the COVID vaccination immunisation program, and we're just working through how we deliver that. We haven't been given a huge amount of time, and we're making a number of assumptions on it, in the sense that we're starting from a much more privacy preserving perspective than we would use in a national context, so, or in an international context. So we're working to release our EU DCC compliant certificate, but in the local context, we're working on basically how do we cut as much data out of it as possible. So how do we just show vaxxed yes or no? And one of the conversations we had last night was an interesting one about exemptions. So we're having a chat to a public health colleague earlier this morning about some research that I was reading last night, and kind of had it confirmed that there are very few people who will be medically exempt from being vaccinated. So there's an article in JAMA, which I'll find after this and send it through. So there were about 8, Ella, I'm going to put you on mute. There are about 8,000 high risk people being vaccinated in the US, and so they wanted to monitor them and see if they had anaphylaxis, and apparently 9 of them did. So this seems like a reasonably legitimate article. So their suggestion was, in that high risk cohort, the risk of actual anaphylaxis is low. Seems to be consistent with our numbers. So even if you assume that 8,000 denominator represents the population at large, that number in the New Zealand context would be, out of 5 million people in the country, 5,000 might have a severe anaphylaxis reaction if they were vaccinated. So I think in that context, it's a really interesting thing for us about how many exemptions to a vaccination certificate you might create. The other thought we had in that was that Rachel, who's our public health person, brought up was ethylene glycol is how the vaccination's kind of encapsulated. And so there are case series on the internet and journals about ethylene glycol allergies, and someone put together a case series of, I think, 15 cases over a 10-year period. So that seems to be a very small number as well. So we think the medical reasons for exemption for vaccination passes or vaccination certificates is going to be a very small number, outside obviously kind of a known age range than we have at the moment.
John, was there any ethnicity breakdown of that 8,000?
I was in the US, so it was kind of, we're just trying to work out a scale thing, Phil, in the sense that is it 1 million of the 5 million people in the country can get an exemption, or is it 100, or is it 100,000? So it was just kind of, we're thinking through, if we need to offer domestic passes, how many people might need to go through a process to get an exemption version of a pass versus just being able to get a pass. So that was kind of where we were going in terms of numbers.
What about,
and only from a medical perspective as well was all we were thinking of. So.
I was interested in that because I was wondering if those reasons for exemption might be, potentially ethnically dominant or dominant. We just got our first people that are enrolled in social services, so they're generally the higher risk end of population cohort, and the vaccination rates are really low in that cohort, and we just got that first through on a relatively small subset in West Auckland. we're getting the rest this evening, so I'd be interested to see if that trend continues. But yeah, it's unfortunately,
it's an interesting
and opt
question
out
about
is,
whether that's trust, Phil, rather than necessarily. So
yeah. I was just trying to rule out the is there a reason why that might be the case other than trust or access? Interesting, opt out is less than 1%, so it tells us that it's actually access rather than trust, even or reach.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Sally,
So
you were going to say something there.
That's a cohort that's predisposition to not engaging, right?
I was just thinking about temporary exemptions for those. I mean, I was thinking with my nurse hat on, not with my computer hat on.
Yeah. A temporary exemption, and I suppose
I was
this
thinking
kind of
immunosuppressed chemotherapy, stuff like that.
Yeah. The public health person I was talking to admitted she wasn't an expert in immunological status. So you may well be right. There's a bigger group. It was kind of more just even to get a number to start. Is it 10 or is it 100 or is it 1,000 or is it 10,000 or is it 100,000? And it's a funny thing. We often start a conversation in healthcare about designing things, and we get caught on what may or may not be large cohorts before we start talking about how many people fit in those cohorts. And so just starting with a number is a really useful thing to go, let's go up from there or let's go down from there. So anyway, that was this is all from last time. Since last time I mentioned we might be looking at vaccination certificates. Turns out it's now a topic du jour for both the media and the politicians. And so we're just starting to do some work in what a domestic certificate might look like. We're looking for suggestions on names as well. So the best name that's come through so far is Summer Pass, presumably because it's going to last for summer. But yep, if you have any good ideas for what we call this thing, feel free to send them through, and we'll add them to the list of ideas we've had. Kind of, if we want to just have a bit of a chat about what's happened in the last 2 weeks in terms of news. Turned out to be true that iOS 15 came out. Turned out that there were some bugs in it. It's always the case, isn't it? So iOS 15.1 will hopefully fix some of those bugs. One of those bugs that isn't affecting me, but is related to the COVID pandemic is and I don't know how many iPhone and Apple Watch users there are on the call, but I'm loving the wear a mask, have your Apple Watch on, and it unlocks your iPhone. It's a great solution. Broke for people that bought new iPhones in the last 2 weeks. So that makes me feel better about having an older iPhone, but that's apparently fixed in 15.1. So there's a bit of a follow-up on a piece of news. We've been seeing more news around machine learning and AI, and I think we'll probably pick that up kind of a little bit later in the conversation. Has anybody else got any other news they want to share? Mary, have you got any news you want to share?
What did I just spot recently? Amazon is launching Alexa Together.
Yep.
It's a subscription service that allows caregivers to assist and remotely monitor aging family members in their homes. So it looks like, multiple family members or caregivers can check in on aging loved ones, and they can customize alerts such as warning in case their family member hasn't used Alexa for a certain amount of time, and remotely helping them set reminders to take medications and things like that. And apparently, the subscription also includes a 24/7 urgent response service and is compatible with third-party fall detection devices. So that's pretty cool. Be quite interesting for you, Eileen.
I thought at the same time they announced like a little robot. Has anyone seen the picture of the little robot? It looks like a mini dog or something.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Eileen? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I saw last night that members of the team in Amazon that are working on it have said it's so bad we kind of want it to fall down the stairs. So that's kind of an interesting admission to be leaked outside their company. But the other interesting thing around AWS in the last couple of weeks is obviously Amazon's decided that they're going to build a region in New Zealand. So they'll join Microsoft building Azure in Auckland. And the way I understand it is because they're building a region to Auckland, it means all of the services that are available on AWS become available in New Zealand. They tend not to exclude services by region. So great news. It'll take a while, but hopefully some of these things like Azure, the announcement with Azure and AWS, give us a more control over the sovereignty of data. It doesn't give people more control over their data necessarily, but at the same time, at least it's in the country again. So that's good news. Good news.
More importantly, does that include Amazon Prime?
Yes, that's a good question. So I'm not sure it's about the delivery or the warehousing. It's more about the computer systems. But yeah, no, it's an interesting thing where you know Amazon for two reasons: computers, if you know about computers, and products if you don't. And I wonder how many people thought it was a warehouse. We're getting an Amazon warehouse in Auckland from 2024, and this AWS thing must be Amazon Warehouse Services. So maybe that's where
center, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah,
but you can imagine, if you don't work in IT, you make this assumption that Amazon's all about, selling stuff online. And so AWS is, it's not actually technology. It's just, one of those big warehouses where they have robots. So it's an interesting question. Has anybody else got any other news they want to talk about?
I've just got a little segue from Mary's update, which actually Mary sent through to me. So there's a virtual age tech conference out of Canada next week. It's free. You can sign up to, but it's looking at technology-based solutions that support older adults and their caregivers. So there's a couple of good sessions I'm going to check out. Time difference is not too bad, so it kicks off about 6 a.m. Runs through. So I can post the link in the chat if people want. Oh, there you go, Sally. I anticipated your question.
And the other one that I've been made aware of is Ireland is running a health tech conference in early November, and they're really interested in. So that's being run virtually. Obviously, the time difference is nowhere near as good because it's 12 hours at the moment. But Ireland has a bit of a reputation and history in particularly the tech sector and kind of the health tech sector now. It's growing as well. So we'll put the details of that conference up as well. Something that's come up, and so I went to a workshop last Friday and found a new tool, which I've posted up on Yammer, which is called Mural. So if you're familiar with Miro boards are an online whiteboard. Mural.co is similar, but it does guided whiteboards in the sense that some of you have probably used Miro for running workshops. This essentially allows you to put timing onto the different whiteboards, so you can walk the audience through your agenda, and it does the timing of the agenda down the side as well. It worked really, really well for the workshop I was in. We're all pretty tech savvy though, so you have to have a think about that. And so that was really interesting. I think it's kind of that next iteration. So in the ministry, we use Miro, and we use that to help us do user stories and epics and business process maps, and then we link that through to our Jira services. So we use Jira to run our backlogs and our epics and connect that to our development path. Miro does that along with dot voting. Cool. I didn't know that. So I've only ever used it for the static kind of display of information rather than kind of the sequence display of information like a workshop might do. What is dot voting? Oh, good question, Sally. So it's a really cool technique where basically you get people to put up all of their ideas. So you end up with 100 ideas out of 30 people because everybody's got at least 3 ideas in them. Put all of them up and then you give people 3 dots. So you take the 3 dots and it's a democratic model, and then you get to vote. You can vote for your 3 most appealing ideas or stickies. So apparently whiteboard's just been updated as well. I love this. So there's competition between the Teams whiteboard, Miro, and Mural, and us as users are benefiting, which is great. That's great news. There is another tool which kind of came to me kind of in a roundabout way. Some of you will be familiar with kind of platform gamers that are really interesting on things like iOS or on Android, where you're a little 2D character and you kind of run around. There's a tool, and I forget the name of it, but I'll put the link in, which combines the whiteboard experience with a 2D gaming experience and video conferencing. So you walk around a virtual environment, which is laid out in a way that you design. You use that to put a whiteboard in the virtual environment, and you can walk up to it, click the button, and see the whiteboard that's being developed by people. And then when you walk up to a person, you can type a chat with them, and then you can push a button and then have a video call with them, or you can all go to a place and do an announcement. So I'll put that link in as well. I can't remember the name of it though, but it's, if you're a fan of 80s computer games, it's certainly an interesting place to go, because it's a nice, seems like a nice virtual meeting tool, but overlays the whiteboard piece, the video piece, and the kind of the movement around a space, which kind of I'll end with. There's a chap who's written an article recently about spending 8 hours a day in virtual reality to do his job, which seems like a really interesting thing, and maybe the future of work is that, maybe it isn't. But certainly when you work in technology and you spend all your day on Zoom and Teams, it's starting to feel like maybe the world is a simulation rather than not, because it seems like people are only 2D these days. So that's kind of the news as far as I'm aware of it in the last 2 weeks. Does anyone else have any other news that they want to share, or any other things that are going on? Justin.
Hi, John. Sorry, I don't know many of you in the room, so nice to meet you all. My name's Justin Kennedy-Good. I work at Auckland City Hospital, and I'm the director of Ara Manawa. So we've got a small design team. But I just I'm not sure, John, how relevant it is, but Auckland City Hospital is going to put an EOI out for 3D printing.
Cool.
3D printing, I know Canterbury ADHB has some 3D printing going on, has for a while. We picked up the maxillofacial 3D prints that Canterbury was doing for our service up in Auckland, and we were getting them couriered up, so now we're doing them, which makes sense. But what we're curious about is a commercial partnership, because our learning curve for 3D printing is going to be too slow, where firms like OSIS and Zimmer Biomed, they already know how to do it. So why would we spend years trying to learn? And also the investment profile for 3D printers, you buy a $750,000 machine and it's out of date in 18 months. So we don't want to go there. The EOI is being run by New Zealand Health Partnerships. So tomorrow they're going to let their counterparts around the country know, because I wonder whether or not we'll end up with regional centres for 3D printing. And anyway, so I just wanted to share that with the group. If people have got questions, happy to share. It's one of those technologies that if a clinician loves it, they go for it. And others say, why are you bothering me? Even though we might know that there are international examples of how it might benefit them. They have to see the value themselves before they want it. So yeah, it just came up when you were talking about AI and data, because in our EOI, I'm going to ask for ideas around how data should be and could be valued, because this is patient data. And I'm aware of some movements into micropayments around data. We might not do that, but maybe there's a way to push the value of patient data through our Auckland Health Foundation, which then funds innovation and becomes a nice virtuous cycle. So if anyone's got questions or wants to participate and help me out, I'd welcome it.
Eileen, I think you've got a question there.
Yeah, I'm aware that the Artificial Limbs Service, so that's a national body, they have been doing a lot of work in 3D printing and digital imaging to accelerate the prosthetics for amputees. So they did put a proposal in, so I can put you in touch with those guys. I believe they have a machine and they have some of the engineers on staff as well that manage all the printing side of stuff.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah. And I kind of assumed, Justin, the use case in the first instance would be maybe for a surgeon who was completing like a really difficult surgery, gets a 3D printed model so that they can maybe visualize it in their hands kind of in a tactile way. Is that use case in general?
Yeah, so surgical planning is one part. The simulation service is keen, but mostly surgical planning. And we're not talking about printing in-house so that we can put things in humans. We're a wee way away from that. But I've heard orthopedic surgeons in Australia dreaming about having a 3D print shop next to their theatre so they can cut cancer out of a bone, walk next door, pick up the custom titanium print and walk back into theatre and put it in. Might be where we're heading, but small steps.
Not tomorrow. Not tomorrow.
Not tomorrow. Baby steps.
Very good. Very good. Something that's come up for me, and so just to kind of move tack a little bit in terms of talking about some fast fives in terms of what's happening. We're just closing out some work with Microsoft that we've done in partnership with ADHB around looking at radiology reports. So I'm interested in having a bit more of a conversation here about machine learning and AI. And so the work we've done is with some radiology reports looking at the reliability and accuracy of Microsoft's text analytics for health service, which has just come out of preview. So we're just comparing it at the moment to the real data. So basically you can see what the report says, and then you can see what text analytics made of it. And then we want to be able to compare that more broadly. So we want to compare that to, a model that some of our data scientists at the ministry could put together, and then a different model maybe coming from AWS. So kind of get a bit of a sense of where the models are at for the same piece of content. So that's kind of our thinking at the moment. But it kind of speaks to a bigger question of that. And I was a part of a piece of research yesterday coming out of the Northern Territory, Wollongong University, which is looking at machine learning and kind of the barriers and enablers to that in the health system. So the first question I got asked kind of led us down a channel of, is the term artificial intelligence overused in association with machine learning? And so my posit was this, of course it is, because it's not really artificial intelligence. And it took a very mathematical view of the world where the machine learning we're using, generally speaking, as a statistical derivative of simple things like regression modeling. So there's a really interesting question about what we did about 3 years ago now. So about 3 years ago, Mary and I did a bunch of work to put together some initial principles for people in the health sector in New Zealand using algorithms and things they should consider. The four kind of parameters we talked about, or the four kind of principles we identified with the group, were make sure that you've got a good governance group that is multidisciplinary. So often why you're creating an algorithm has a multifactorial input and a multifactorial output, and so you need a diversity of thought if you're going to create something. The second thing we thought was important is to understand your data and the potential biases in your data. And that sometimes that's easier said than done. So that was the second principle. The third principle was how we do operationalizing of an algorithm is very different to having a data set for building an algorithm. So having a research curated data set so that it's very complete and you've trimmed all of the useless data out of it in order to get all of the right attributes is a very different thing to trying to use operational data for the same thing. So that was the fourth principle, and third principle, and the fourth one was you should always be checking how that algorithm is working. So you should be reviewing the use of the algorithm, the outcomes, and the expect versus expected outcomes of that algorithm, and ensuring basically that it's doing what you thought it was going to do. So those were the four principles we came up with, and lots has changed. So in the 3 years, so the question for you guys is, do we think we need more? Do we need more guidance? Do we need more advice? And what should we explore? So some of the things that I know we should be thinking about are, what are the business models for algorithms? And I think that's interesting because there's incentives that sit behind business models. Do we separate them out into different types? So as machine vision, do we have different rules for machine vision to physiological algorithms to social algorithms? Interesting question. And then kind of the third question in my head at the moment is there a question about, what's going with that? Oh, explainability. That's where I was going. So do all of the algorithms need to be explainable? And I suppose the initial position I'd bring to that is, I don't understand how the plane flies. I trust that it flies, but I know that there are people that know how the plane flies. So there's a difference between reproducibility and explainability. So if I'm an expert in how planes fly, I should be able to reproduce a plane. I might not be able to explain how it works if I just fly on one though. So Alan can't just publish the Auckland City Hospital something, Justin?
Yeah, he just published the strategy for AI. He published it in LinkedIn. That was where I saw it.
Yeah, nice. Nice.
So I can forward it on to this group if you guys want. I haven't had a chance to read it myself, so but maybe some of the things that you're talking about have come up. Definitely the question around equity or bias in data is a real hot topic for us. But we're a little bit behind people like Waitemata, I think. So yeah, I don't know enough about that domain to be useful.
Very good.
John, we've got a using the Microsoft toolset, we've got a research piece happening with precision-driven health, and it's using a 10-year data set captured by Waipareta Trust, and it's looking at first of all, a lot of it's natural language, case notes, etc. So we did it in 2 phases. The first phase is to build can we actually take that natural language, and on the other thing is it's predominantly social or social health, social determinants of health data rather than clinical data. So it's you know, it's case notes about what's happening, alcohol, drug, mental health, well child, that kind of space. And so we've proven in phase 1, which is completed, that actually the Microsoft tools are actually creating a useful data set that can actually be then run through an AI predictive model. Currently building using a series of techniques. Basically, these were this was the description of the whānau. This is the interventions. These were the outcomes. These outcomes were successful. These ones weren't, to varying degrees. And then what happens if I present a new whānau? Can I then create a suggested list of interventions? And that piece of work, I think, is due the end of the year, but they are having some quite considerable success. They're using a range of algorithms and AI techniques. Not all of them are within the Microsoft realm, but they're applying them, the data set is in Azure, so they're applying them in there. So watching that space will be quite interesting, because I think the ramifications of that is taking legacy case notes to build these models, not just clinical data, across any spectrum.
Totally agree. I think the opportunity we have with the information in New Zealand is the fact that we have been binding every single piece of data in the health system to an NHI number. So the story we tell on a regular basis, particularly to Treasury and with regard to the investment in header, is China can have 1 billion NHI numbers, but they haven't had them for very long. And outcomes in healthcare take a long time. So you can't without great difficulty create health outcomes in a very short period of time. So the fact that we've had the NHI number for about 41-ish years now means that we've got 41 years of data. But your point is exactly right, Phil. If it's all in free text, if you can't get access to it and you can't take it apart, it makes it really, really hard to use. So there may well be lots of value in that. Now, interestingly, the person that's just joined us, and he's not going to get a chance to avoid this, is someone that's just joined the team this week. His name's Ben. He's come in and he's a principal advisor, and he is just starting to have a look at the problem statements that we spent some time on with regard to consent and transparency and delegation earlier this year, to try and figure out what experiments we might need to do. So that problem of balancing the opportunity with the data versus what do people expect us to use data for. So how do we build trust and willingness to participate rather than erode it? So Ben, do you want to just give us a little bit of a mihi and a likes and dislikes and things you're interested in? Still on mute, buddy.
Sorry, I've been having all sorts of fun with this headset today. So kia ora koutou and aka whakapaha. He pakiarianga tuatahi aho, no ingarangi, no koti mana, o ko tupuna, ko te whanganui e tara, taku tūranga waiwai, ka tuku mihi, o ki matarangi te maunga, ka waikanae te awa, ka Rex toku whānau, ka Ben aho. So that's, first generation Pākehā, just saying there, of English and Scottish descent. Although born in Auckland, Wellington's my tūranga waiwai, and I recognise Mount Vic, which is my home, as my mountain, and Waikanae, which is where we're fortunate enough to have a holiday place, as my river. Likes and dislikes, geez, I don't know about that one, John. That could be a long discussion.
We're
likes,
a friendly group. Group.
Definitely actually diving into sort of the solving wicked sort of social problems. Certainly like having my walk along the waterfront every morning and been known to be fond of frequenting Wellington's coffee, craft beer and wine bar scene as well too. Certainly like being the father of a 17-year-old daughter who's going to be moving in with us full time as well too, which I'm quite excited about in the next couple of weeks. Dislikes, strong believer in equity, so not a big fan of the whole white male privilege thing, despite the fact that being an epitome, being the face of it myself. And anyone that I guess would be sort of who's on the other side of the Southampton or Phoenix football teams as well too. So would be a dislike for me.
Very good.
Yeah, and open to any questions from the group.
Welcome aboard, Ben. So Ben started on Monday, as well as our new ministry equity lead. So our new ministry equity lead, Peter, hopefully should be joining us very soon as well. He may be messaging me just to say his meetings run over. But to come back to kind of the conversation we were having around AI and machine learning, we've heard about Auckland City Hospital maybe having some guidelines. Does anyone else, and thanks Phil for your work you're doing, does anyone else have any thoughts on how we should think about AI and machine learning in New Zealand, in the health system specifically? Brett, what are your thoughts? You're on mute too, mate. I love this. We're all getting really good, really good at virtual meetings, and we're all really terrible at turning the mute on and off.
No, what I was saying was I'm what you were alluding to before about really understanding AI and the difference between the two. And they are quite distinct. And I think people just jumble it all up. You know, you're getting to a point where it's data, it's integration, and then it's you know, this amazing ability with AI and, you know, throwing tools at things and all the rest of it, when it's still fairly young, I think. And machine learning is a whole different track again, that, you know, there's a lot to be learned and a lot of opportunities to apply it, particularly in a health setting, separate to the AI side.
Very good, very good. Sally, I'm sure you've got an opinion on this.
I'll unmute myself. I don't have an overarching opinion, but I do have a research project that I'm about to start. Well, I'm planning as part of a project that we're doing. So there's a study that we're doing, which is, I can't say who the funder is at the moment, but I can say that it's looking at the shape of pregnant women and the evolution through pregnancy. And my part of it was going to be using probably machine learning at this stage to decide when the best time to give education material is. So that's kind of what one of the things I'm working on. And at the moment I was looking at machine learning, but we could also apply AI quite well as well to that, I think. The only other thing I've had to do with machine learning or anything is my PhD data, and that was taking the Statistics New Zealand health survey for 5 years, digging into that to look at how New Zealand children have gained weight over the years and body shape and morphology have changed to be able to estimate weight in resus, kids resus. So they're the only two things I've really had experience with in that arena. So I can't really give you much of an overview other than those two.
No. It's an interesting question then about how it's used. So it's easy to think about it in theory, but if you're not thinking about it in practical terms of what problems you're trying to solve, then you kind of miss both sides of it. Do you know what I mean? So all you think about is the practical application and not the context.
Yeah.
Both those are important, I think, particularly in this.
Other things I'm trying to figure out how to do and I haven't yet is a lot of people have been coming to me over accessibility things lately in designing apps, and we were thinking about looking at doing a crowdsourcing type crowdsourcing type platform, like thinking about Yelp or something like that, where people can actually rate the accessibility of businesses, places, or anything. So I haven't quite figured out what we should drive that with, but I'm looking for a student if anybody knows one that might come and help me and actually do some work.
Accessibility is a really interesting thing.
Yeah.
Ben, you're probably going to get interested in this very quickly as well. So the health system generally has designed things around itself in the past.
Agreed.
So we design things for clinicians to use. We're very quickly stepping into a place where we're designing things for consumers to use. And so we currently follow the DIA's instructions around accessibility. When we built the booking system, when Brett did his work on Tātai, when we built COVID Tracer, we've been focused on accessibility. One of the interesting things is though it's much bigger. It's much bigger than how you. And so there is guidance, but it's kind of at 40,000 feet. And so one of the things that got brought up with us is, imagine it'd be really, really good if we had standard icon sets for the health system. So from a readability perspective, what is the icon for radiology? We don't have one. What is the icon for you can't come in here with a pacemaker? What is the icon for I don't know, lots of things. Steps over here. Now, some of them will cross over into everyday life, but there's lots of things that happen in the health system that having an icon for would be quite handy. Make sure you scan in, things like that. And then the other thing is, there's a. Sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, I had quite a long conversation with the COVID Tracer app team about accessibility because VoiceOver wasn't working with it very well. And there are a number of other issues, and we need to think about the social things like, I don't know if I haven't met half of you guys. I've met some of you guys at HINS and places like that, but I don't know a lot of you. But I don't know if you know about me. I'm legally blind, so that's why I started into all of this stuff. And the thing that came up to be the hardest point for people in that community around the COVID Trace app is actually finding the QR codes, not actually scanning them, and actually getting the tilt of the phone right and things like that. So we discussed putting in things like voice prompts to actually help people to line the phone up or things like that. But from an
So one of the interesting things, it's kind of lead us on to a whole other subject. So something that we're literally doing the media announcement on it today or tomorrow, I think, was we're trialing NFC stickers. So NFC tap and go.
Yay!
Yes, tap and go is something that we're trialing in all of the mojos in Wellington and around Victoria University to have a look at how that actually changes people's willingness to participate. We're about to publish a standard for how you convert a QR code into a NFC tag, and it's built into COVID Tracer already. So if you've got a compatible phone, you should be able to use it.
One of the suggestions I thought of was you could always just have an NFC tag made of rubber or something that has the QR code printed on it anyway for each business, and it'd be pretty cheap, so they could use it.
It is indeed. So there's lots of interesting things that we're learning already. How big does the NFC sticker have to be in order to not get too close to it? The fact that they discharge over the weekend, so on a Friday, it works really, really well. And on a Monday, unless you're maybe the third or the fourth person to use it, it doesn't work, which is really interesting. Didn't realize that was a thing. And then we can't mount them vertically very effectively either. So you can only really mount them horizontally because people really struggle to use them. And they're not so much tap, it's place. So you have to place it. So it's a really interesting set of dynamics around some of the usability stuff. And then also, depending on how secure you are with your phone, essentially what we're saying is, hey phone, here's a data packet coming from somewhere, you should trust it and put it into this app. And so corporate devices tend to have a lot more trouble with this than your personal device, perhaps.
I was reading about the new iOS 15 bits and pieces around NFC tags, and I followed the instructions I could find on the internet to try and get it working. I couldn't.
Yeah,
and I'm feeling savvy.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. We know that more Android phones have NFC available in them than iPhones. So iPhones until iPhone XR, basically you have to activate the tag in the phone, like the reader in the phone, in order to then check in, which, you know, from a usability perspective is kind of okay, but not great. So we know that Android phones actually just work, but you can turn NFC on and off in an Android phone, and you can't on an iPhone. So that's kind of one of the people we've been talking to who want to sell tags to businesses for, say, restaurant tables and things like that. They're saying actually on the sticker you need to tell people to turn it on, so they don't know to turn on NFC.
That's what I found as well. I went looking for turn it on in the new OS, and you didn't have to.
Yeah. So the other thing we've suggested to them is, could you put a braille signal on the on the tag to say this is how you.
So what I was thinking.
This is what the sticker does.
Yeah, this is what, in response to what I was thinking, the other thing I was thinking of doing around accessibility, because everyone keeps coming and asking me about it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of good and it's kind of not, because most of my research hasn't been in that arena till now. But we were thinking about trying to get design, and please don't go much further with this because we're still figuring it out. Trying to design a app or something that will scan a space and give recommendations on. I was thinking where the COVID QR could be put, or can it give you recommendations on how to rearrange your environment so it's more user friendly for people who have access issues. So there are a couple of things I've been thinking of, and but I just don't have the funding and I don't have the people to help at the moment. But I've got the ideas and the willingness. So if anybody has any contacts.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good idea. I think that's a really interesting thing, is that ability to assess yourself as maybe a business about how accessible are you, which might end in a tag, if you know what I mean. It might end in a tag which, you know, you can put on the front of your business, which says we're accessibility friendly. So suddenly you've gained a customer group.
They've got the accessibility tick that there's a meeting about. Oh God, I can't even remember when. But what I'm finding is that lots of groups of people with disabilities are talking about things, but none of them are talking to each other. I wondered if that might be somewhere as well. And actually AI. I was talking to my friend Jonathan, who runs Workbridge, and we were talking about AI the other day and discussing how AI, the perceptions of the developer are coming, or the developer or the owner are coming through in AI, and a lot of people with disabilities are not able to be picked up for jobs from that respect. So I don't know a lot about it, but that's what he was saying, that's a common thing that we probably need to look at as well. I don't know. Anyone else got any ideas?
Lots of ideas. I think.
I'm not doing anything on that project though.
but I think this is the interesting thing, and Justin, you'll no doubt know about this. Design in the health system is just in the dark ages. I think is probably the most polite way to put it, particularly when you think about it in a consumer-centered model. So in that, just the ability for us to kind of make a big dent in the universe from a consumer perspective, it's there right now, I think. So Justin, what are your views on that?
I agree. One of the things that I talk about when hiring new designers is the to put it politely, I don't talk about dark ages, but I quite like it. I might from now on. I talk about design literacy being really low.
Yeah.
So part of our job is it's like playing table tennis against yourself. Like I've got a team of designers, but we have to go and coach the client to be a decent client. So if you were designing a house, you're the architect, you go to talk to the person, they say, I want a 3-bedroom home. And you're like, cool, how much do you want to spend? I don't know, design the thing and I'll tell you. You know, $1 million 3-bedroom home is quite different to a $500,000 3-bedroom home, but they're both 3-bedroom homes. So what do you want? And they can't articulate what they want. So there's a lot of work to do to understand the problem to be solved. And then you've got to overlay the co-design element, make sure that you're framing problems with users, not to users or at users. So the design literacy is very low. I think, John, there's a huge opportunity for design to add more value. It's taken me a few years to get that recognized, but my team has gone from 2 about 3 years ago to it's going to be 10 soon. And it's just going to continue to grow. And I'm really pushing the interdisciplinary design angle because an environment isn't separate from the device, isn't separate from the experience of the human that you're talking to.
Yeah.
So you've got to have them all together. So it's slow, it's hard, it's really hard. Getting all hospitals struggle to invest in future focused thinking because they're too busy worrying about delivery today and tomorrow, and I sympathize with that. But definitely lots of room there, John.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, so we're doing some work at the moment with a company called Voco on something called a special patients database, which is for people that are in the in compulsory treatment for mental health care, particularly kind of put there by the law. They're in a situation where we're trying to explain to them not just the design process, but also the agile process. So we're trying to get them to make trade-offs of what's most important. And that seems to be working out okay, Mary, I think, hasn't it? Yeah, so as long as you start up front with you can't have everything on the first go, but we're going to give you 8 goes to get as much as you can done. And we'll work on each of those things as we go. And here's what we've done. And that's 2 weeks later after we started. They start to feel like there's a lot of ownership of solving the problem. And when they can see it in that granular way where it's not going to be finished, because it's not going to be finished to the end, but here's where we're at today. There's another demo for us again tomorrow, another week on. And so it's going to have changed again. And I'm really looking forward to seeing kind of the feedback from particularly from the clinical people who go, this isn't how IT works. IT works where, in the health system where you come back 5 years later and tell us you need more money and we never see anything. So I think there's definitely not just the design thing, but the delivery of the product as well, I think is a key opportunity, that iterative delivery of a product.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, John. When I was at a design conference, when we could travel, I was in Melbourne, and there was a whole session on the Double Diamond, and this was being run by the Royal College of Design, I think, in London. They were running it, and the whole session was on the 4th D, delivery.
Yeah. Because
my experience with design has been a little bit frustrated by the discovery, define, design bits, cool and fun and great, but the delivery leaves a bit to be desired. So getting that all hanging together, I think the agile approach adds a lot of value. And one other thing I was going to add, John, is that the point of difference between my team and my performance improvement colleagues who do the Lean Six Sigma continuous improvement work is that I have an explicit return on portfolio approach, whereas they have a return on investment. So what they do has to pay off. Whereas what I do, I can run lots of horses, and if some fall over, I still have permission to keep going as long as the other horses are good.
Yeah.
And so partnering with the universities is really good for that because they can do the exploration. They've got the know-how and the time and the students who want to work on meaningful problems. As long as I have a return, the hospital's happy. So it's quite a useful model.
That's a nice point, and I like the portfolio one. Phil.
Just picking up on that design, and how do you get customers to be able to describe what they want? And, in your house example, people actually run out of the ability to describe or use the language that is meaningful, or they, it's broken, and you can only answer it's broken. I don't know, it doesn't work. How many times can I say the same thing? It doesn't work. One of the things that we've found really, really useful in our conversations is we actually give our customers, not only do we do feedback through Agile, we actually give them the tool up front and say, have a play. You can't break it. Just, you know, because most people these days are used enough to being able to drive around randomly, you know, a tool or an app or whatever, run around it and tell us. And then people are much better at being deconstructive than they are being constructive in their feedback. And, oh, no, that doesn't, we don't like that. And then suddenly you can unlock whole conversations. So if you can, I guess the prototyping, but very, very early, because, people really struggle to describe what they want.
An example of that in New Zealand is Xero. It started off with a very basic, very, 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 very basic platform and built off the back of all of their customers' feedback. And it's still relatively basic from a financial management perspective, but it does all of the things their customers want it to do and doesn't do a whole lot of other stuff that they don't want.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely an advantage that design has over because I could call my Lean Six Sigma colleagues, because that's where I came from, I could call them process designers, but there's no physical artifact. So it's really hard for people to get their heads around the mental model. Whereas with design, whether it's an app or a building, because you can run a design charrette in the same way you can do a hackathon, if you can get people to physically engage with an artifact, the conversation is so much better.
Yeah, it's so the output from a Lean Six Sigma process is a graph where the line goes in the right direction, and lots of people can't read graphs. So funnily enough, I had to give I can see Chris Patton on the call. I gave a lecture on Thursday night for Chris's group, and there were 9 of them, and they didn't ask me any questions, but I gave them 3 things to go away and read. So the first one was the double diamond, so design guidelines, and yes, Ben, the new version which has just come out, which has the 2 things at the top and the bottom. That's the first thing. Second thing I asked them to look at was Edward Tufte's data visualization guide, because how do you make data beautiful? And then the third thing I got them to read was the Phoenix Project. So if you haven't read the Phoenix Project, go and read the Phoenix Project, because it explains to you why IT people don't understand this stuff and how they think about IT. And if you know IT people and they frustrate you, tell them to go and read it too. So basically, it's a novel about how you get people in IT to work in an agile manner, and why agile and reproducibility and engineering is good in IT, rather than it being an art. So Shane Hunter made all of us as SLT read it as part of our jobs. So I think it's a really useful book for people to get into and understand. So those were the 3 things I suggested to Chris's students in digital health that they kind of get across. So the design councils, Double Diamond, Edward Tufte's book, and the Phoenix Project. So
it's just interesting talking about accessibility before. Helping the disability directorate with some mahi around data, and we're going to do some strategic logic work soon. And I said, well, what's your overall, problem statement? And it was the health system cannot identify disabled people, is unaware of their access needs, and produces inequitable health outcomes for them. I just said, well, is that all? Remarkable. And that's, from within the ministry, which is owning up to it, which is great. And it's a great first step on the track. But man, what a big problem.
Hey, Martin, I see Martin Fronstein sent a message. There are heaps of Edward Tufte books. There's one I do recommend. So I'll put it into the notes from today and post that up. So I think it's making data beautiful, I think, is the name of the book. But there's a few of them, so I'll pull that one up. Tufte, and it's Tufte, Edward Tufte. Yeah. So very good. Well, what I might tell you all is I'm going on leave for 2 weeks. So the one that's scheduled for 2 weeks' time, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back after that and have another session. So thank you very much for coming along today. And feel free to share the fact that we do this kind of open conversation every 2 weeks with other people that might be interested. We're starting to see sort of 30 or 40 people watching the video outside coming to the meeting, which is good news. So I'll keep posting the videos, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you all in 4 weeks, not in 2 weeks. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Nō hora mai.
See you guys.